Alright everybody, how's it going? I'm Travis Mihm from Adder Motorsport. I've been getting talked to a lot from people from Adder Motorsport and a couple people from the community about MoTeC and data logging. There's a lot of people out there that are interested in data logging and don't really quite know where to start. You know, the telemetry logging, how to see stuff on MoTeC, and how to use that data to help you out in setting the car up, going faster. A lot of people with the same question and all looking for the same answer. So I'm gonna talk today a little bit about how to gather a data log, and you know what you need to be doing while you're data logging to get good data to use when you're analyzing it in MoTeC. The most important thing that you can do for yourself is learn to be consistent. I can't stress that enough. It's really important to get consistent laps in, get consistent data, and know that changes in lap time are because the car feels more stable to you, or the car is quicker through a section of track because of a setup adjustment that you did. So if you're constantly learning and improving over the course of a data log, the next time you go out, you might not be as quick, or you'll be as quick as your last couple laps were, but it won't show much difference. Or you could do a setup change that can make the car worse. It'll handle worse than you did your first time out, but you're learning the track and you're learning the car, and you'll end up being quicker with a chassis that's actually set up to be a little bit worse in performance than the previous setup. So you want to make sure that what you're getting in the results is what's actually happening on track and in the car. And the best way to do that is consistent placement of the vehicle, consistent driving technique, and have those real nice smooth laps that are just a couple tenths off each other at the most. If you're making all kinds of mistakes, or if one lap comes in a second and a half quicker than the last one, and then you get it really loose in the next lap, and your whole data log is just laps like that, you're not really going to be helping yourself out much, and the data that you find on MoTeC is going to be so hard to interpret that you're just not going to be able to help yourself out when trying out a different setup adjustment. So I guess we'll start at the basic. What's data logging? In general, data logging is taking the information that iRacing is sending to your computer, or that you're communicating back and forth between your computer and iRacing about how the car handles, and exporting that into something like MoTeC. Tire temperatures, shock position, damper histograms, all these things that iRacing is just sending out. Hey, every millisecond, it's taking a read of your tire temperature, your shock position, things like that, and you're going to use that to make the chassis handle a little better. Why? It's pretty simple. You need an optimum chassis to perform. Having the chassis set up fantastic. Anybody that's hopped into a car they haven't driven very well, or haven't spent a lot of time in, and they're struggling, they can tell you that once they find that magic setup, all of a sudden the car's easy to drive. I got that in the Rough Cup, which we're going to be looking at today. When I first hopped into the car with the baseline setup in Season 2 of this year, I hated it. I thought it was just the worst car to drive ever. It was so demanding and so difficult, and I just didn't feel like I could ever be consistent with it. It was just not. It didn't feel right to me. Then I started looking at a couple different setup options. I tested a setup from the forums, and the car felt totally different. It was just smooth and stable, and it completely changed how I could drive the car. From that setup, I could start looking into the performance aspects and start getting enough seat time and comfort level and confidence to start, really pushing the car hard, getting that understanding down, and then start getting the consistent laps in and start bringing the pace. So that's one of the things that data logging can help you out with, is figuring out what's going on with the car and what you can do to fix it, whether it be in your wheel input, or changing how you get onto the throttle pedal, changing how quick you get off the brake pedal, or things like, oh hey, obviously my damper settings are really bad, I should try and soften up the dampers a little bit. Things like that are all a lot easier, much easier to do when you're using data logging to your advantage. How you set up a data log? It's relatively simple mechanically. You hit Alt L. That opens up iRacing telemetry. It starts exporting data. This is going to export whenever you're on track to a separate file. It's called an IBT file. That's what iRacing uses for telemetry. You can't open that up in anything, really. Not for MoTeC anyway. You can't open up the IBT file in MoTeC. You have to use the program called Mihm Telemetry Exporter, and that will transfer the data from an IBT file over to an LD file that MoTeC will be able to open up, and then you'll be able to see all the data you collected. That's the basic part. That's what you got to do on the computer side of things. To get data that's useful, like I said before, you need to work on consistency. You know, you got to be able to run a pretty good amount of laps that are all relatively similar. That's the best way to capture data, is to capture quite a few laps that are all relatively similar to get a good idea of how the car is responding and how the car is working. So we're gonna I'm gonna try and go through that. I'm gonna try and capture a 10-lap data log here. I probably won't be talking so much about data logging while I'm in the car, more just what you should be looking at while you're data logging. You can see that I did a couple laps here. I did 5 flyers just to make sure that I was consistent, got back into the rhythm of things. These are all, you can see all 5 laps came in at a 39.9 or a 39.8. That's what you want to be looking for to capture data logs, is those consistent laps that I pretty much did the same thing in every corner all the way around the track. If they were a second spread out, then I probably wouldn't be looking at data logging so much as just running more test laps, trying to get that consistent line down. I could go faster here. I've squeaked out a 39.4, 39.3, and that was with pretty high fuel in the car. But that's not really important for data logging. You're not trying to show off and set up a good time. You're just trying to get a consistent racing line down and follow that racing line for a lot of laps. So today we're going to be running the rough C-Spec. The Rough Cup is at Montreal this week. It's a tough track. I'm actually pretty happy with the setup I have, but I'm going to log some data. Every week I log data with this setup, and if I can find something that worked for this track, then it'll probably carry on to the next track. But I'm just going to try and, when I'm in the car, I'll probably talk a little bit more about how the car is handling, what you should be looking for. In general, the car is, it's rear engine, it's ass heavy. You don't have a whole lot of downforce. It's got that sports car feel. You can't fly through the braking zones, you can't brake late. The car doesn't have the huge sticky tires like a GT3 car or a real serious GT car does. You will get the thing to spin on exit. If you tromp onto the throttle, it'll lock up brakes pretty easy. This is sort of the mix between just a street prepped sports car and an all-out race car. You're sitting in the middle. You got a little bit more downforce, but you don't have a lot of downforce. It's not going to let you fly through the fast corners. The big thing in the car that I can tell you is slow in, fast out. You can lock up brakes. You're not going to gain a whole lot of time by trying to brake as late as possible, because that's just gonna screw up your corner. Anybody who's a fan of Porsche knows the Porsche line. That's the kind of slow in, fast out approach. You got so much weight back there, you might as well take advantage of it on exit. So you kind of tend to late apex corners. You brake late once you get used to it, but not as late as you'd think. Just a clean, consistent braking line. Most of the time, you're not really trail braking a whole lot. It's pretty hard to do in this car. You can do it a little bit, but your goal is to kind of get that late apex early onto the throttle, roll onto the throttle, and just use that traction on exit to power yourself out of every corner. The big thing to drive this car also is getting used to that sequential box. It's not like most sequentials. This is the mix between the sports GT car sequential. So it's not going to auto blip for you. You gotta blip the throttle on the downshifts. You're going to want a left brake, left foot brake. It's got the spark cut upshift, so you're going to see the flames come out because you're still burning that fuel through the exhaust when you hit the shift paddle. But the big thing, especially with that late braking, if you're trying to do that and you screw up the downshift a little bit by blipping too early and it doesn't take a gear, or you don't blip hard enough and you lock up the rear end when it takes that lower gear, you're going to have a bad time. It's going to be terrible, and you're going to be putting heat into the tires. The car doesn't like really hot tires. You can, if you're pushing too hard on exit and the car understeers, the front tires are going to be hot for the next corner. If you're pushing too hard on exit and oversteer, those rear tires are going to be hot for the next corner too, and it's likely to step out on you again on the exit of the next corner. So I guess I'll hop back into the car. I'm going to try and run a good 10-12 laps. For the most part, these first 5 flyers that I did, I was just kind of getting used to the handling of the car, getting back into the rhythm of it, and trying to notice a couple things to make sure that I watch myself on in the data log. The car doesn't like the curbs here right now. It might be just my setup. It might just be how you're going to have to drive the car this week. But those big curbs, if you try and cut those chicanes and stuff, it's not going to work well. I found that I lost almost a half a second when I was tagging the curbs all the way around the course. As soon as I stopped tagging the curbs and just sort of rolled through the chicanes real nice and steady with keeping the car flat, staying off the curbs, I got that half second right back. It's also a lot easier on the tires when you do that. You're not lighting the car, not lighting the rear tires up on exit. You're not locking brakes up when you hit curbs coming in on entry. It's a lot easier on the car. It's a lot easier on the tires. It's a lot smoother. It's going to help you out a lot in the race. So with all that being said, I also noticed that the car tends to push a little bit in general, especially in the slow corners. That turn 2, the long right-hander in second gear, it was pushing quite a bit on exit there, and then it would gradually snap loose towards the top end of second gear as you were shifting into third. So you kind of had to watch that. I think that might be an issue with the rear springs, but we'll see in the data log. I'll try and work you guys through in another video on how to analyze the data we get from this session, as long as I can keep it on the track for 10 laps. If I build a car in this video, I'm just going to start over, and I'll show you guys the data log that I got in the next video. But all that said, I suppose we'll hit the track. So again, the key here is to just take it easy, run that consistent line. I actually have iSpeed covered up for most of my data logs, that or I just have it running in the background. I also don't use the split bar or anything like that. I don't really care how fast I'm getting through areas. I just want to do it the same way every time. One other thing to consider with this car is that on cold tires, it tends to oversteer, it tends to lock up front brakes, so take it easy on that outlap. Once you get one good lap in, or you finish up your outlap, usually the tires come into their own, and you don't have any more problems with them until they get too hot. It's a really tough corner right there too. I've been taking first gear in there just because the car understeers quite a bit in second gear. It's pretty tough to get through there in second gear and retain some good speed on exit. It's been really tough for me, so I'm just going into first. You get a lot more consistent in this car too when you learn how to open up the corners like I just did right there, bringing it right up against the wall. tough corner for a lot of people. It leads you into trying to late brake there, but if you try and late brake into that corner, it's not going to end well, and mostly because you overshoot the second corner. If you try and late brake, you can get into that first corner okay, but you've screwed yourself for the left-hander, and you're just not going to be able to carry speed through that next section. Another tough corner for me here too. The car likes to bounce around a lot through there, and you can lose the front or rear end through there. It'll oversteer or understeer on you. I'm still working on that exit. I can't get a real consistent exit through there yet. Second gear was a little easier to exit. I was a little bit more consistent in second gear on the exit, but the entry, middle part of the corner, I was just terrible. Fast on the wheel there if it starts to bounce on you. Of course somebody's texting me right now. Probably my worst corner of the track right there. It's those curbs are really tough on the chassis. Really bad line through there. That was just me getting on the brakes a little too late. Car gets a little loose through there. You got all that weight in the rear end, so just keep on the throttle. Again, really opening up that section right there. That'll keep the car from stepping out on you through there too. It's just bringing it right up against the wall. That big hiccup on the second into first downshift right there that I did, that is almost always caused because you blip the throttle too early. So I pulled the paddle and blipped the throttle at the same time, and the car didn't really want to downshift on me. You got to pull the paddle and then blip the throttle. These laps are coming in a little slower. I'm trying to be consistent for the data log and not bin it. Again, opening up that corner on the exit, getting real tight up against the curbs on the apex, and then letting it flow back out. That'll really keep the car from oversteering through there. Mess that all up. That's what I get for talking. You really got to brake earlier than you think for that chicane. First gear in that corner, you can roll onto the throttle earlier, but if you just punch it, you're gonna light the tires up. It's gonna hit the rev limiter when you shift into second. You'll end up being a lot slower. Just roll on the throttle early, but gradually. So far the car's handling pretty well. I'm pretty happy with this setup here. I am having to lift through there as the chassis gets really bouncy on you. Once I shift, I'm short shifting into third and then lifting a little bit. Again, messing up that second into first downshift there. I'd advise most people, if you're below the 1 or 2% mark in the world records in practice or something like that, you'll probably be easier just running second through that corner. Really easy way to go through that wall of champions chicane right there. You got to roll onto the throttle again. Stay in second, flow through that chicane. I wanted third through here. The tires are up to temperature now. They're all up to pressure. You'll probably find that the car starts speeding up, even at that consistent racing line. As the fuel burns off, you will see the car speed up a little bit. This wasn't a particularly good lap. That 39.6 was pretty good. But eventually you'll hit a point where you start slowing back down again because of the tire wear. was a really bad line through there. It doesn't take much to get offline in that chicane and lose just a couple tenths. One big thing there was I hit those two big white curves and the car understeered quite a bit because I was off throttle. So the lap after the 39.86, I'm going to remember that I screwed up that corner there. It was a pretty trashy lap. I made quite a few mistakes on this one. So when we're trying to find a couple laps in a row to analyze, we'll probably stay away from this lap. Starting to feel some understeer in the chassis balance as the tires wear right now. But I've also been putting a little bit of excess heat in the tires, making these small errors. Again, didn't get through there particularly quick. Well, I'll shut up a little bit and try and get a couple good laps towards the end of this run here. Not a great lap here either. It's one of the big things with the C-Spec is if you're off your rhythm, you're making those mistakes, it's a lot easier to continue making those mistakes. Most of us at Black Adder Motorsport kind of cut our teeth in on the Mustang, the FR500. This car actually has a lot of pretty similar properties to that car in that, you know, it didn't take long for you to punish your tires if you weren't driving nice and smooth and consistent. This car is no different. Drive it like a jerk, it'll kind of treat you like a jerk back, and your lap time will start dropping. You'll keep making the stupid rookie mistakes. was close. Notice that pretty much the only way I caught that was dialing a lot of opposite lock in right off the bat and staying on the throttle. You could also see that it was quite a bit more loose through the Wall Champions chicane too. And there it goes. You notice that after I made that big mistake, that whole time I was pretty loose. I never let the car recuperate after that. We kept getting more loose. We kept getting more loose. In turn one, the car stepped out on me a little bit. Going into the chicane, the car stepped out on me a little bit. Coming out of the chicane, when that thing bounced, I was expecting the same kind of grip I had in the last lap, but the tires were too hot. So right there, it was really more just me not underdriving the car. I wasn't overdriving the car, but the rear tires were too hot. So driving the car like normal was actually overdriving the car. So those are some things that you really need to watch out for, especially in the race, where you're going to be in packs of cars and you're going to be wanting to push real hard like I was right there. It's just not it's not going to work. You got to back it down a little bit, and you got to let the car relax. You got to let those tires come back down to operating temp. You can't keep scrubbing the heat right back into them. That whole time when I was letting the rear end slip out a little bit on all those exits leading up to the crash, I was just putting heat right back into the tires. I would overheat the tires just that little bit every time on corner exit, and eventually they just don't want to stick anymore. And you'll expect them to, they don't, you end up in a wall, which is really easy to do here at Montreal. So remember, just don't worry about that outright speed, especially in a race. If you have to lose a second on a lap to get those tires back down to operating temperature, go ahead. That's a lot better than packing the car into the wall. This was just a practice session. I already gotten enough laps in. And it would have been it'll be good to look at that data. Hopefully it'll show those rear tires getting too hot. Maybe it'll show that they were just overpressured. Maybe it'll show that I just did something different that time. We'll see. The good thing about data logging is that you can go back, you can look at the data, you can analyze what happened on that last lap there, and say, oh, okay, well, I know that the tires were hotter on that lap going through all those corners. Those rear tires were a lot hotter than the last 10 laps. They were 30-40 degrees warmer. Or the centers were 20-30 degrees warmer. They're overpressured. You might want to take a half a pound out. If they're overheating, you might want to add a half a pound just to try and keep that core temperature a little bit cooler. But that's all for now. We got it pretty much locked up. I'm gonna exit out of the car real quick and open up the laps tab. You'll see that we did laps 7 to 17 were all flying laps. There were a couple there that weren't so great. You can see right here there was a couple laps that lap 13 and 14 they weren't that great, and I was having to let the car recuperate back down again. I think by lap 12 was 6 laps into the data log, 7 laps into the data log. That's where you start hitting the temperature, hitting the wear in the tires, where you really got to bring it back down a little bit. So I'm not surprised that my fast laps came in lap 4 or 5, and then soon thereafter it was trying to run that consistent lap time and trying to push the car that hard. Eventually it ended up causing issues. That's one big thing in the Rough Cup, is that you really need to watch out with driving the car just as hard through a whole 25 lap race, something like that. It's not going to work out so great, just simply because you can't drive the car that hard at the end of the race. You got to really dial it back. You got to keep the heat out of the tires, control the wear. If you set out to just hot lap every single lap, by lap 10 or 12, your tires are going to be destroyed. It was at Mid-Ohio. That happened to me my first race. I was pushing too hard trying to catch somebody, and I eventually just slowed myself down and started losing them, even though I was probably a little quicker than they were. I had a little bit better car, but I was just pushing too hard, putting too much heat into the tires. I kept making a mistake that would lead into another mistake, that would lead into another mistake, and it didn't pan out. The race after that, I realized, you know, the mistake that I was making there. The next time I came up on somebody that I had a 3-second gap, something like that. Instead of me trying to chase them down, I just tried to maintain that gap. You know, if the gap started coming away a little bit, I just let it do it. I just kept trying to plug those good consistent laps in, and it just so happened that they were trying to get away from me, and they started making the mistakes. I started reeling them in, and by the time they got to me, their tires were so shot that the minute they tried to defend, they got sideways and I went right by. So it can work both ways. But we got a good data log in. I'm going to go ahead and exit the sim now. And in the next video, I'll show you guys how I have my MoTeC set up. I'll show you the basic steps to analyzing the data, and I'll show a little bit more on screen about, you know, how it works to get the telemetry file, convert it through Mihm telemetry exporter, and then open it up in MoTeC, and we'll go through some of the basics of how I look at data. So this has been a video by Black Adder Motorsport. I hope to see you, and I hope to see you on track soon, and hopefully with a little better setup next time. That's it. Have a good one.